So, welcome to our next section on the various platforms or perspectives of Reform Judaism. And we've been through, I think, two. I think actually let's see. I have them listed here. Yes, we've been through two. We've been through the Pittsburgh platform of 1885, the Columbus platform of 1937, and now we're going to look at the San Francisco perspective or platform of 1976. And as you can imagine, a lot has happened going from 1937 to 1976, namely the Holocaust. So I am going to do
in the creation of the state of Israel.
And the creation of the state of Israel. Yes, and we're going to see, all of that shared in this discussion. So, with confidence that you can see the screen, I will begin. So, a centenary perspective. I think the last one was also called a centenary perspective. Was it? Let's see. No, but it was just Columbus platform. So 1976, of course, because it's 100 years after the formation of the Union of American Hebrew Congregations. I'll actually read the introduction. The Central Conference of American Rabbis has, on special occasions, described the spiritual state of Reform Judaism. The centenaries of the founding of the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, organization which is now called the Union for Reform Judaism, and the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion seems an appropriate time for another such effort. We therefore record our sense of the unity of our movement today. And I'll just make one comment, maybe a few comments. So this is 100 years after the formation of these organizations. The organizations were formed around 1875, 1876 in Cincinnati. And I think we discussed this, but Isaac Mayer Wise, who was the founding father of this movement, envisioned the movement as being one that would basically bring all American Jews together. Didn't turn out that way. And one of the ironies is, I'm going to maybe enlarge this a little bit. One of the ironies is that Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, there were two separate organizations, and I can't remember when they merged. Jewish Institute of Religion was
around 1947.
Okay, so yeah, thank you. Okay. That was in New York. Hebrew Union College was in Cincinnati. The two merged, and then later we now have campuses in Jerusalem and a campus in Los Angeles. And actually, the original campus in Cincinnati is being phased out as a place for study for Reform rabbis.
For rabbinic, I'm sorry, but it's for rabbinic teaching rabbis, but the campus is still there for several reasons, at least for now, right?
Yes, and for graduate programs and so on.
And Jewish
But one of the ironies is that this seminary for Reform rabbis is the oldest Jewish seminary in the world. All the other seminaries that were much older in Europe were all destroyed by Hitler. So it's one of the consequences of the Holocaust. So would someone like to read 100 years of what we have taught?
I'd like to do that.
Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
We celebrate the role of Reform Judaism in North America, the growth of our movement on this free ground, the great contributions of our membership to the dreams and achievements of this society. We also feel great satisfaction at how much of our pioneering conception of Judaism has been accepted by the household of Israel. It now seems self-evident to most Jews that our tradition should interact with modern culture, that its forms ought to reflect the contemporary aesthetic, that its scholarship needs to be conducted by modern.
Hold on, let me get.
Yeah, okay, it's okay. Right, I know we have to do modern critical methods. That change has been and must continue to be a fundamental reality in Jewish life. Stop. Keep going. Okay.
Yeah, I'll just make one or two comments. I was struck by the the phrase household of Israel in capital letters, actually. I didn't notice the capital H for household. I would say that's a English translation of Beit Yisrael,
Yep.
the house of Israel. And so the idea of Beit Yisrael, house of Israel, is sort of all the Jews. And so we have a couple of points, and I don't know that I actually have a book on the history of Reform Judaism. I don't know how popular Reform Judaism was, in the early 20th century. But certainly it's being celebrated here. And a main point is that tradition should interact with modern culture and that forms should reflect the contemporary aesthetic. So, this is in the time of what we would call classical Reform Judaism. So you're not going to find a lot of tefillin or even the wearing of talitot. And that change has been and must continue to be a fundamental reality of Jewish life. Again, I would say one of the characteristics of the Orthodox world is to try to resist change, except when it's impossible to resist change. Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
Two things. One is I noticed they said North America, but it may comes later. But this idea that the UAC and URJ, I don't think they were originally included Canada and the U.S. And I don't know when that happened, but by then it happened because they said North America.
Yeah, I also don't know when it happened, but
sorry.
But it's probably worth pointing out that the CCAR and the URJ, I believe, only includes representation of North of the United States and North America. I'm not aware of
URJ.
Of any
well, I don't know about the CCAR, but I assumed it would be all Canadian Reform rabbis also. No?
Yeah, well, that's what I mean by North America.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
To Stephen's comment, because of the math, Stephen, they calculated the beginning in 1873 when HUC was founded. So we did have a celebration in December of 2023 in Washington called the 150th anniversary of the Reform movement in America. So we already had the 150, even though you could argue, per Rabbi has just pointed out, the different pieces kind of came together a year or two differently. The URJ used the 1873 as the date, and there was a 3-day celebration in Washington D.C. A couple of Decembers ago.
Okay.
So it was 47 years from the 100th anniversary to the 150th. Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
it just depends what you use as the date.
Yeah, URJ 3 or 4 years ago, because these take a long time to plan, decided they would use the 1873, and that made
that. Let's not nitpick on that.
All right. Yeah.
Okay. Let's continue at moreover.
Moreover, though some still disagree, substantial numbers have also accepted our teachings that the ethics of universalism implicit in traditional Judaism must be an explicit part of our Jewish duty, that women must have full rights to practice Judaism, and that Jewish obligation begins with the informed will of every individual. Most modern Jews, within their various religious movements, are embracing Reform Jewish perspectives. We see this past century as having confirmed the essential wisdom of this movement. I agree with the statement.
Our movement.
I agree with the statement, but there's a little hubris in this way it's worded.
So a bunch of key elements of Reform Judaism is that ethics, and we'll talk about social action, and it's going to be emphasized later in the document, becomes a prominent part of the Reform movement. Treating women as having full rights to practice Judaism becomes a major part of the Reform movement. And then this idea that we have will, that the way I usually characterize it is that the ritual elements are between us and God, each individual and God, and the ethical elements are binding on all Jews. So all of those things are fairly radical in the history of Judaism. If you talk to an Orthodox rabbi, you're friendly local Chabad rabbi, they would say, who are we to decide what God really thinks is important in Torah and Talmud. So it is a major change. Okay, let's Alan, why don't you continue? 100 years.
100 years. What have we learned? Just wanted to go back. Just one thing that when it sounds like the evolution, how other movements and other people look at Judaism, and what went through my mind was the matriarchs being added to the Amidah in the conservative movement, but that was 100 years at least after, you know what I mean? After this was written, not 100.
Yeah, and actually the Reform movement stole it from the Reconstructionist movement. So the movements are influencing one another,
Well,
but there is influence.
That's good. Okay, sorry. Okay, back here.
Okay.
Obviously, much else has changed in the past century. We continue to probe the extraordinary events of the past generation, seeking to understand their meaning and to incorporate their significance in our lives. The Holocaust shattered our easy optimism about humanity and its inevitable progress. The state of Israel, through its many accomplishments, raised our sense of the Jews as a people to new heights of aspiration and devotion. The widespread threats to freedom, the problems inherent in the explosion of new knowledge and of ever more powerful technologies, and the spiritual emptiness of much of Western culture have taught us to be less dependent on the values of our society. Okay, and I got it. I think our society, and to assert what becomes perennially valid in Judaism's teaching. We have learned that the survivor of the Jewish people is of highest priority, and that in carrying out our Jewish responsibilities, we help move humanity toward its messianic fulfillment.
Okay, lot going on there.
These are powerful paragraphs.
Yes. These are probably not meant to be read aloud. These are complex.
Oh, and I have to say, I probably read these things, and this isn't the first time that I've been impressed with us going through it slowly.
Yeah. So we have a lot going on. I mean, it's hard to imagine more earth-shattering developments, in the 30s and 40s of the Holocaust and the formation of the state of Israel. And clearly the Reform movement is going to react to this. And also, I remember once asking in a class on Kabbalah taught by Arthur Green, someone asked him, what do you think the reason is for the increased interest in spirituality in American culture? And one of his comments, which I will never forget, was the sort of the failure of pure scientific devotion to really solve the problems of mankind. I would say, the kind of in the scheme of the 1700s and 1800s, there was this sort of underlying sense that as science and biology and medicine and physics advanced, we would find a much better world and a much better culture as a result of, improvement in knowledge. And clearly the Holocaust is a powerful testament that is not the case. And the availability of nuclear weapons, it makes it even scarier.
Can I make a comment from that paragraph before we go? So as it positions this experience with the Holocaust and then moves to the experience of Israel as was known at the time this was written. But what I'm reacting to is that some conversation I've been in now is comparable to the severe experience since October 7th about Israelis, how they see their country, how some others see their country. I don't mean the enemies. I just mean the myths that we have adopted about the state of Israel, being a safe, democratic and Jewish state. It was shattered to some degree on October 7th, and it parallel is the Holocaust is the point I'm making, but that couldn't have been predicted in this paragraph.
Yeah, clearly. And the other thing we're going to start seeing, and we'll see it more in the document, is the idea of Jewish peoplehood being embraced by the Reform movement. Whereas if you go back further, the Reform movement started basically saying Judaism is not a people, it's really more of a religion like any of the other religions, and there's no special ties to Israel. And as this history developed, and I would say particularly with the Holocaust and the creation of the state of Israel, we see in this document and in the evolution of Reform Judaism a much closer attachment to the concept of Jewish peoplehood and the state of Israel. So would someone else like to
someone else? I appreciate that.
Diversity within unity.
That's also the speaking arrangements, right? We want diversity in who gives the speaking. Yep. You're good.
Okay, Beth, would you like to read? I muted you before when you. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. Diversity within unity, the hallmark of reform. Reform Jews respond to change in various ways according to the Reform principle of the autonomy of the individual. However, Reform Judaism does more than tolerate diversity, it engenders it. In our uncertain historical situation, we must expect to have far greater diversity than previous generations knew. How we shall live with diversity without stifling dissent and without paralyzing our ability to take positive action will test our character and our principles. We stand open to any position thoughtfully and conscientiously advocated in the spirit of Reformed Jewish belief.
Right there.
While we may differ in our interpretation and application of the ideas enunciated here, we accept such differences as precious and see in them Judaism's best hope for confronting whatever the future holds for us. Yet, in all our diversity, we perceive a certain unity, and we should not allow our differences in some particulars to obscure what binds us together.
So lots of flexibility in Reform Judaism, but there are some common principles, which is going to be the focus, I would say, of the rest of this document. So first, God.
1, God. The affirmation of God has always been essential to our people's will to survive. In our struggle through the centuries to preserve our faith, we have experienced and conceived of God in many ways. The trials of our own time and the challenges of modern culture have made steady belief and clear understanding difficult for some. Nevertheless, we ground our lives personally and communally on God's reality and remain open to new experiences and conceptions of the divine. Amid the mystery we call life, we affirm that human beings created in God's image share in God's eternality despite the mystery we call death.
So big issue in Reform Judaism, that I would say Reform Judaism embraces many non-traditional concepts, but we don't go so far as to accept as a Reform Jewish principle denial of God's existence. And the best case of this, and I know some of you are familiar with it, is at one point in time, a humanistic Jewish congregation applied for membership in what was then the UAHC. Humanist Judaism basically says we're Jewish people, we love all that stuff, but we don't accept the idea of God. And they were denied membership in the URJ or UAHC. And it's not often that organized Judaism, I would say strikes hard on a theological concept, but this was one example, and it's reflected in this paragraph. Yeah, Erwin.
Around what year that?
I don't remember. No, Erwin.
Yeah, it's always puzzled me that in different temples, I met several temple members and Torah study members who do not believe God. So I always wonder that why are they belong to a temple or why they are attending Torah studies.
Yeah, well, that would be a good question to ask them. And
no, I asked them, they could not answer them.
Okay, so they may not know the answer to that. And so what I would say is Judaism is both a people and a religion. So you are fully and 100% Jewish if you absolutely reject the idea of God. As long as you're born traditionally of a Jewish mother, you are as
Yeah.
Jewish as the chief rabbi of Jerusalem. And that's what humanistic Judaism is about. But what this document is saying is that is not a valid expression of Reform Judaism. And so it's drawing a line there. Look, I think many people I know who don't believe in God, who are not Jewish, come to our Torah study, come to study sessions because they find the study of it interesting, irrespective of whether you believe in God or not. And I don't
And
know.
my other question is, Rabbi, that I understand the Reform movement, but why did the Reform movement? And I know, for instance, Temple Adat Elohim and Central Synagogue in New York,
Go ahead.
and another Reform temple in Montreal, that they adhere the Torah and the interpretation of the Torah in Hebrew, and the prayers are in Hebrew. And so why didn't they change it completely to the native tongue?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. And I think the answer is, in the language of this document and others, is Hebrew connects us together. So a Jew in the United States, a Jew in Russia, a Jew in Israel, a Jew in South Africa, a Jew in anywhere. If you walk into a synagogue, you can understand the prayers. And so I would say it's a powerful statement of Jewish peoplehood and binding Jews together. And actually, I even have on my bookshelf it's actually a translation, but from the German, of an 1857 Reform prayer book. So it predates the American. It was a German prayer book, but there's still a lot of Hebrew in it. Alan.
Just to reinforce what Erwin just said, it occurs to me, if you think about the early Reform founders in Germany and also Isaac Meyer Wise here, Hebrew was never a consideration to not include, just like the consideration of God was never included. There was this controversy about vernacular in the prayer books, controversy in the way that the modern Jews wanted to have their prayers to have Hebrew and
to have both.
And German in Germany and English here.
Mm-hmm.
But the point was the Hebrew part. It's nice that he reminded me anyway, that's so central that nobody ever considered dropping Hebrew.
And they did drop other things. For example, the rabbis, and I think we've discussed it, the rabbis were very uncomfortable with Kol Nidre as a prayer on the evening of Yom Kippur, actually before the evening of Yom Kippur. So if you look at early Reform prayer books, it's just simply not there. So they just plain drop it. And in one of them they say, in a slightly later one, there's one line that says, the cantor chants Kol Nidre, but there's nothing either in the Aramaic or English translation. And then there's mistranslations. So when the Reform movement was uncomfortable with things, they were not shy about dropping them, but they did not drop Hebrew, which is interesting. Okay, Beth, would you like to continue?
I have to stop reading now because it's going to get too noisy in here. So you won't,
okay.
There'll be too much background noise.
I'll read a little bit. Anyone else like to read?
I don't read.
Okay, please.
The people Israel, the Jewish people and Judaism defy precise definition because both are in the process of becoming. Jews by birth or conversion constitute an uncommon union of faith and peoplehood. Born as Hebrews in the ancient Near East, we are bound together like all ethnic groups by language, land, history, culture, and institutions. But the people of Israel is unique because of its involvement with God and its resulting perception of the human condition. Throughout our long history, our people has been inseparable from its religion with this messianic hope that humanity will be redeemed.
So I think it's important to notice that the Reform movement is talking about messianism, But what it means is not so much an individual Messiah reestablishing the throne of David and and the rebuilding of the temple and animal sacrifice, but more of a messianic age in which these aspirations for peace on earth, goodwill toward men will be achieved. And I can't say it often enough that the idea that you're Jewish because of your birth, I think, is unique in religion. I think Islam also has it, but Islam covers many, many different countries. Israel was one country, one nation, and we consider ourselves members of that household of Israel, Beit Yisrael, even to this day. But also, what is different than a nationality is that anyone can become Jewish, and once you become Jewish, you are part of that nation.
There's one narrow exception, which is that because male conversion requires circumcision, people who are male and for medical reasons cannot be circumcised are unable to convert.
That's not true. It's absolutely not true. If there's a medical reason why you can't be circumcised, you don't need to be circumcised, and it doesn't affect your Jewish status.
Even I thought that was only for people born Jewish, not. But
no, actually, I've had this discussion with Elliot Dorff, who is the senior legal mind in the conservative movement, and we actually had a case of I would say an older man who was on significant blood thinners, and whose doctor told him he should not be circumcised as part of his conversion. And then I assumed incorrectly that just as it would be with a newborn baby, let's say that had hemophilia, you wouldn't do a circumcision. That this is Rabbi Elliot Dorff explained to me that they can't issue a blanket exception for people because everyone would invoke that exception. Everyone would basically get a doctor's note that I can't have a circumcision. But what he told me is that he would be certainly willing to issue a private exemption for anyone who would be in that situation. And it turned out this guy just went and got himself circumcised anyway and was fine. Yeah. So what you're saying has some element of truth. But I know in the Reform movement we don't insist on circumcision. So I'm not aware of anyone whose conversion was rejected because for some reason he couldn't be circumcised. Okay, let's continue. Ken, if you would continue with Torah.
Torah results from the relationship between God and the Jewish people. The records of our earliest confrontations are uniquely important to us. Lawgivers and prophets, historians and poets gave us a heritage whose study is a religious imperative and whose practice is our chief means to holiness. Rabbis and teachers, philosophers and mystics, gifted Jews in every age amplify the Torah tradition. For millennia, the creation of Torah has not ceased, and Jewish creativity in our time is adding to the chain of tradition.
So what I see as the key elements here is it does not say that the Torah is literally the word of God, but it absolutely affirms that it's that these early records that are biblical and Torah are uniquely important to us. The study is a religious imperative. The practice is our chief means to holiness, and that the creation, namely the development, the understanding of Torah, doesn't end. We keep studying it and we keep drawing new insights into it. I would say maybe Orthodox tradition would agree with that last point, but I don't think it would agree with any of the other points. Okay, let's continue.
Our religious obligations, religious practice, Judaism emphasizes action rather than creed as the primary expression of a religious life, the means by which we strive to achieve universal justice and peace. Reform Judaism shares this emphasis on duty and obligation. Our founders stressed that the Jews' ethical responsibilities, personal and social, are enjoined by God. The past century has taught us that the claims made upon us may begin with our ethical obligations, but they extend to many other aspects of Jewish life, including creating a Jewish home centered on family devotion, lifelong study, private prayer and public worship, daily religious observance, keeping the Sabbath and the holy days, celebrating the major events of life, involvement with the synagogue and community, and and other activities which promote the survival of the Jewish people and enhance its existence. Within each area of Jewish observance, Reform Jews are called upon to confront the claims of Jewish tradition, however differently perceived, and to exercise their individual autonomy, choosing and creating on the basis of commitment and knowledge.
Yeah, so pretty good statement that the emphasis in Judaism is on action rather than creed, action rather than your faith and your the statements of what you think about the nature of God and so on. And again, there's this emphasis, but it's certain there's nothing in Judaism that says, nothing in Reform Judaism that says you shouldn't do this. There's sort of I would say either mildly or significantly insulting idea that this kind of 3 octane levels to Judaism, Orthodox, conservative, and Reform. And probably the most privately painful thing you can say to a Reform rabbi is some kind of statement that I'm very Reform, and by that mean that you're not observant at all. So Reform Judaism embraces it all, but I would say focuses on the ethical, but recognizes that there is a powerful reason and rationale behind ritual as well. And we're going to address the state of Israel. Oops. Okay.
Our obligations, the state of Israel and the diaspora. We are privileged to live in an extraordinary time, one in which a third Jewish commonwealth has been established in our people's ancient homeland.
So just
We are
mention,
bound.
they're talking about first commonwealth, first temple, second commonwealth, second temple, a 2,000-year period after the destruction of the temple to roughly 1948, a third commonwealth.
We are bound to that land and to the newly reborn state of Israel by innumerable religious and ethnic ties. We have been enriched by its culture and ennobled by its indomitable spirit. We see it providing unique opportunities for Jewish self-expression. We have both a stake and a responsibility in building the state of Israel, assuring its security, and defining its Jewish character. We encourage Aliyah for those who wish to find maximum personal fulfillment in the cause of Zion. We demand that Reform Judaism be unconditionally legitimatized in the state of Israel.
And at this time, I would say in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, a huge battle was taking place in the state of Israel to recognize any kind of existence of Reform Judaism. So we're right in the middle of that historical place with this document.
At the same time that we consider the state of Israel vital to the welfare of Judaism everywhere, we reaffirm the mandate of our tradition to create strong Jewish communities wherever we live. A genuine Jewish life is possible in any land, each community developing its own particular character and determining its Jewish responsibilities. The foundation of Jewish community life is a synagogue. It leads us beyond itself. It leads us beyond itself to cooperate with other Jews, to share their concerns, and to assume leadership in communal affairs. We are therefore committed to the full democratization of the Jewish community and to its hallowing in terms of Jewish values. The state of Israel and the diaspora in fruitful dialogue can show how a people transcends nationalism even as it affirms it, thereby setting an example for humanity which remains largely concerned with dangerously parochial goals.
Yeah, it's an interesting insight in that Judaism is sort of a balance between the nation that we live in and our common I would say, sense as being members of Am Yisrael, of the people Israel. And one hopes that someday, all the nations of the world can also have that sense of being part of the nation in which they live, but also a powerful sense of being part of humanity. Alan.
This, I may have missed it because you scrolled past while I was looking the other way, but the word Zionism isn't mentioned here, is it?
I thought I saw Zion
It was
mentioned.
mentioned. It was mentioned.
Okay. And in the
Yeah, there it is. The cause of, we find maximum fulfillment in the cause of Zion. So Zion is just a synonym for Israel.
well, Zionism, well, it can be done that way, but Zionism is an entity intended to create a Jewish state.
Yeah, Zionism is a movement intended to create and support the existence of a Jewish state in the Holy Land.
Yes. Okay. So the Reform movement could have danced around that, of course, because of the history that we.
That's it.
Okay. Thank you. That's fine. Thanks.
Okay. That's a new one on me. I don't know who's beeping, but I'm impressed.
That's me asking a Canadian chair of the World Union, a Canadian, when it's Canada, and she gave me a pointer. She didn't give me an answer. Okay, sorry about that.
Okay. Okay, so we're moving toward the end of this. So Ken, number 6.
Our obligations, survival, and service. Early Reform Jews, newly admitted to general society and seeing in this the evidence of a growing universalism, regularly spoke of Jewish purpose in terms of Jewry's service to humanity. In recent years, we have become freshly conscious of the virtues of pluralism and the values of particularism. The Jewish people in its unique way of life validates its own worth while working toward the fulfillment of its messianic expectations. Until the recent past, our obligation. Oh,
Rabbi, could you explain to me this last sentence? I don't understand it. The pluralism and
The value, yes.
particularism.
Yeah, so I would say one of the characteristics of Reform Judaism, and certainly it's a characteristic of my own activities, including tomorrow, is to be very much involved with other religions and other movements and other peoples on both general service. So I'm actually attending and I'm giving the opening blessing and prayer and thoughts for what is called congregational care teams. This is kind of caring committees in all kinds of religious organizations, mostly Christian, but a few Jewish. So Reform Judaism very much occupies itself with talking and working with non-Jews, whereas I would say certainly in the Orthodox world that is historically not true, and very famously, if you're into this stuff, Rabbi Soloveitchik, who is one of the primary legal authorities in the Orthodox world, said you can work with other religions to preserve peace in the world, but you're actually forbidden to work with other organizations, with other religions, to discuss religion.
Sorry.
And understanding.
I don't agree with that, because for many years, every Wednesday I used to go to Chabad, and there were many non-Jews who attended Rabbi Brisky's lectures on Torah.
Yeah, so Chabad actually is more open to the non-Jewish world, particularly on things like helping people with addictions and so on. And I would say that that would be in the characteristic, or in the under the heading of making the world a better place and improving just the relationship between neighbors. But I'm not aware of any participation of Chabad in any interfaith organization. So I've been part of lots of interfaith organizations, and I've never had an Orthodox representative become part of that interfaith organization. And even in some cases, they won't even participate in organizations like the Board of Rabbis. which would be a Jewish organization embracing all the Jewish movements. You will find modern Orthodox Jews involved in that, but I've never seen a Chabad involved in that. So it is true to a point. I don't remember if we read the last. I don't think we read the last paragraph.
Right.
So, okay,
Until the recent past, our obligations to the Jewish people and to all humanity seemed congruent. At times now, these two imperatives appear to conflict. We know of no simple way to resolve such tensions. We must, however, confront them without abandoning either of our commitments. A universal concern for humanity, unaccompanied by a devotion to our particular people, is self-destructive. Passion for our people without involvement in humankind contradicts what the prophets have meant to us. Judaism calls us simultaneously to universal and particular obligations.
and although this was written 50 years ago, it's really at the center of what we're focused on today in the Middle East. Okay, we're almost there. Let's continue, Ken.
Our hope, our Jewish obligation. Previous generations of Reformed Jews had an unbound confidence in humanity's potential for good. We have lived through terrible tragedy and been compelled to reappropriate our tradition's realism about the human capacity for evil. Yet our people has always refused to despair. The survivors of the Holocaust, being granted life, seized it, nurtured it, and rising above catastrophe, showed humankind that the human spirit is indomitable. The state of Israel, established and maintained by the Jewish will to live, demonstrates what a united people can accomplish in history. The existence of the Jew is an argument against despair. Jewish survival is warrant for human hope. We remain God's witness that history is not meaningless. We affirm that with God's help, people are not powerless to affect their destiny. We dedicate ourselves, as did the generations of Jews who went before us, to work and wait for that day when they shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain for the earth. They shall not hurt or destroy in all. My holy mountain for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea.
That's it. And this one, I'll stop sharing. We can see each other a little better. This reminds me of something I talk about a lot. And there was a book called The Gift of the Jews, or The Gifts of the Jews, and pointed out that Judaism gave the world the concept that history has direction. And what's meant by that, I think it's by Thomas Cahill, is the author of that book. What's meant by that is, if you go back far enough, life was one unending drudgery. Think about, the life of a typical person in the world, whether, you were a hunter-gatherer or a serf or a slave or just a peasant and so on. Basically, you had a very difficult lot in life. Your life was continually threatened by war, by famine, and by disease. And you were lucky if you lived, more than a few decades. And the concept, if anyone would have suggested it, that the life of your children and your grandchildren should be better or could be better than yours, that concept was preposterous. Everybody understood that that's what life was about. Judaism, back the prophetic vision and the messianic vision is the idea that we're supposed to make the world a better place. And, the Talmud says it's not up to any individual to complete the task, but everyone has to participate in. And so Judaism gives the world this concept that we're supposed to make the world better. That I would say now we're disappointed when we have this sense that the life of our children isn't better, life of our grandchildren isn't better than the life we live. That is actually a concept that Judaism develops and gives the world. And I would say that idea is at the heart of Reform Judaism. So first Alan, and then Erwin, and then anybody else.
And does this connect to my understanding of Kabbalah, where as the soul is recycled, it's toward its completion, that you end up with a complete, the soul is not complete until at the end of whatever the cycle is. It relates to Kabbalah. What you're talking about is that you participate in making the world, your soul more complete by making the world more complete, but this goes on and on. Am I connecting the right thing here?
Yeah, so I've never heard, I am certainly not an expert in Kabbalah, but I've never heard that concept that Kabbalah definitely embraces the idea of reincarnation, and that your soul is born into another life to come back into this world. And the language I usually use is to continue its work and learning.
Same
But
thing.
I'm not aware that Judaism embraces the idea that you see in Hinduism of at some point in time, when you've really worked on your soul long enough, you get to sort of a nirvana. And I actually have heard that
Well,
I thought about that in Hasidism.
Kabbalah isn't normative Judaism anyway, right? In that sense.
Right. Yeah, and again, it's focusing on what you believe isn't normative to Judaism. Focusing on what you do is normative to Judaism. Erwin.
Yeah, I think we don't usually say this because we live in modern times, but I think Shabbat was a revolutionary concept.
Yes.
That we need to rest on the 7 days, and most of the I remember most of the stores are closed and nothing was selling. So, and the reason for that is to rejuvenate ourselves.
Yes.
For the next day.
Yeah,
so
and
I
it
think
says,
that is the most revolutionary concept coming from Torah.
I would say that is a revolutionary concept. And the language, you know, it says God rested on the seventh day, v'yinafash. So, you know, the word nefesh is in there, and you can say was re-enlivened or rejuvenated, was re-inspired. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can translate that, but even God has a cycle to the week, and there's one day in which we sort of refrain from working, and I would say that also is a revolutionary idea. Maybe not as revolutionary as Rugelach, but pretty good.
But it's not Shabbos the same time everywhere in the world. So is God simultaneously resting everywhere, or God resting in one place and working in another?
Yeah, you're getting very particular, you know. I mean,
God knows. Jay. Jay, you have your hand up. Would you like to say something? I don't know if you're speaking, but we can't hear you. And you're not muted, so you probably have selected the wrong microphone in your computer system. If you can figure it out, great. If not, you can save it for next time. Yeah. So, any other thoughts on this?
I have one question, Rabbi.
Okay.
And you know, I would like to know why this whole concept what we read today never addresses anti-Semitism.
Yeah. So the question is, does Reform, is an important element of Reform Judaism the way it addresses anti-Semitism? And evidently not. I mean, actually, I'll have to see, and I haven't, you know, it's been a long time since I looked at the other statements, and I actually don't recall the Reform movement in these statements addressing anti-Semitism. It's actually it's a great question, and I don't know why it didn't, and I don't know what it would have said, which would argue that the Reform perspective on anti-Semitism would be different than an Orthodox or conservative or a Chabad perspective on anti-Semitism.
The reason I'm asking, because apparently the originators who started the reform movement in Europe, they all experienced anti-Semitism. That's why they wanted to have a place for the Jews to live.
You talking about
And
Zionism or Reform Judaism?
Reform Judaism.
So what I would say, my understanding of Reform Judaism would be the response to the reduction of anti-Semitism, namely in Germany and France and in Europe, in the United States, where Jews were being welcomed as citizens of the country. And so the question is now, if I'm living in Germany or France or England or the United States, and I'm considered a citizen of the country, that's new. It hasn't happened for thousands of years. How am I to respond? How can I practice my Judaism in a world that accepts me? Jews have lived for a long time and are able to practice Judaism in a world that doesn't accept us. We live by ourselves. We have our own language. We have our own laws. We have our own community. We're fine. Now, how do we live in a world that accepts us and wants to do business with us? And even lately wants to marry us. How do we deal with that? And I would say
that is my big question, because that means that we has to assimilate.
Well, that means we have to develop a form of Judaism that allows us to integrate with the world. Now, that you may call that assimilation, or you just call it an accommodation. I mean, the Jews in Hellenistic times adopted speaking Greek and translated the Torah into Greek. Jews in Muslim world have adopted different approaches to living within the Muslim world. Jews have always reacted and adopted with the times, and it becomes very dramatic in in the last 100 to 150 years, and Reform Judaism is definitely a response to that. So
but Rabbi, correct me, maybe I am wrong, but it never worked out.
I don't know what you mean by it never worked out.
Only in the United States, I think that's the only country, or maybe Canada, which Jews really feel that they are the citizens of the country. And if you go to Germany, Austria, France, England, they are.
Yeah. So I have lots of relatives. Actually, Sonia has lots of relatives living in France, and I would say they would absolutely consider themselves as citizens of France and vote in the elections and participate in French life. And I would say they're nervous about anti-Semitism, but I don't think they would consider themselves detached and want to live in a ghetto. They live openly.
How did the Reform movement react to, for example, the Dreyfus situation? He was a full-fledged member of
right. It
France.
was an example of anti-Semitism.
Exactly.
Right. So I don't know that there was any reform movement in France at that time. And ultimately, I think as you know, as we've read this, the reform movement didn't really embrace Zionism at all until until after the Holocaust. So I would say the reform movement didn't really embrace Zionism, and then
Herzl embraced Zionism before the Holocaust.
Yes, and Herzl was not a religious Jew. So you had secular Jews embracing Zionism. Certainly Dreyfus wasn't a religious Jew.
Yeah.
So anyway, Alan.
Two things. Although the wording in this platform early on, I'm reminded the wording of the pride of not the word acceptance, but the way in which Jews have been engaged with America felt like it was saying that, and therefore, ... the problem of anti-Semitism is solved by our being Jews in America. I know I connected a lot of dots to make that statement, but I saw the pride in the choice of words in a way that
Yeah, I mean, I would see that there was pride that the movement was succeeding. And, I don't know how many congregations were part of the Reform movement in 1976, but it was growing.
it was
And,
pretty good. Yeah, it's hundreds, 600 or 800 probably,
yeah, and it certainly was not growing around the world. It's only fairly recently that you're seeing progressive Judaism have congregations around the world and in Israel that are really thriving. So it was clearly a North American phenomenon for quite some time.
Well, let me add this World Union for Progressive Judaism, because in 1925, a woman by the name of Lily Montague in London created this equivalent to the UAHC to serve a country, a liberal or reform, whatever you want to call it, unorthodox synagogues around the world. Now there's 175. I don't know how many were, earlier, but the point is this, on a very small scale, I don't want to overstate this, a small scale, since that the reform movement that we tend to relate to because we're American, but I know in the World Union history that even in France and these places where we refer to as not having reform, or South Africa, they've had it a long time.
Yeah, it just hasn't been very widespread.
No,
and I know in Israel, when I was in rabbinical school, it was the first years of having an Israeli rabbinical training program.
exactly.
So
Yeah,
before
right.
that, basically, you had American Reform rabbis going to Israel to serve Israeli Reform congregations, and that, I would say, underlined and emphasized the idea that Reform Judaism isn't really an Israeli movement, that it's
Well,
really an American movement.
and
And then we had the first ordination of actual Israeli Reform rabbis, which is probably about 20, 25 years ago.
now there are 130 or 140 Israelis who become Reform synagogues ordained, and 154 synagogues. So in your period, which was the 90s, is that when you were referring?
I was in Israel in 1998, 99.
So I'm going to say, based on roughly, there were half the amount of synagogues. There still were 25 or 30 of them now that they're doubled in the last 25 years. But the presence has not been very visible, and there are people I know all the time who don't even realize there's any presence.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. So thank you all. I'm
you.
actually have a speaking engagement in Ojai next Wednesday night. So we will not have a class next Wednesday night. And we will continue. I think we'll just continue with these statements. The 2 weeks from now is September 11th. So I don't know. I'm sort of tempted to talk about something on September 11th, but you'll probably hear more about that and on the TV than anything I could add. So I think we'll just continue this. I think we have two more, if I am not mistaken. We have the Miami platform in 1997, which is called Reform Judaism and Zionism, a centenary platform. And I think actually, I don't know if Irwin's still here, it doesn't look like it. That's actually, I think, 100 years after Zionism really takes off. And then we have a statement of principles for Reform Judaism in 1999. And on that one, I think Alan and I can both remember Richard Levy of blessed memory visiting synagogues and basically exploring with members of our movement and members of our congregation.
Having his picture on Reform Judaism, where with the tefillah on, which was a very radical idea in Reform Judaism.
With tefillin, did you say?
Yeah, the picture of him, Rabbi Lee, in the Reform Judaism magazine.
Yes. And, and when the chief librarian of HUC in Los Angeles retired, he gave a great talk, and he said, when he started at HUC, there were no tefillin and there were no talesim, talis wearing Jews, and there were no women And he said, and now as I retire, I see women, rabbinical students wearing talit and tefillin. So we've come a long way, Madel.
That's one of the fun times when I go to a Reform conference like I did in New York in May, is to see men and women, not just men and women on a morning service, a day service, but wearing a small number, but still notably wearing tefillin.
When I go to Reform rabbinic conferences, I would say somewhere around 20% or more of the rabbis attending are wearing tefillin for weekday services.
Yeah. Nice.
Okay, well, good night, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
See you Saturday, Monday, Wednesdays. See you when we see you. Take care.